What's up, everybody? Welcome to NFL Fantasy Game Day presented by Geico. I am Adam Rank. That's Kimmy Checks. That's Marcus Grant way over there. We are ready for Week 10. And Kimmy, how are you living?
I'm good. You guys, it's Week 10, double-digit weeks of the NFL season. That means we're 1 week closer to the NFL Fantasy playoffs. I got to get my lineup together. I got to really make sure that I make the playoffs. I beat you guys in fantasy football this season. Marcus, how are you? Happy Sunday, my friend.
I'm good. Look, it's always important to make sure you stay hydrated. So I have a coffee, which is probably not hydrating at all, but I do have my big jug of water here. So we are going to stay hydrated. It's important. We're getting through the stretch run of the fantasy regular season. Playoff time is around the corner. So let's go. Let's do it.
I'm always amazed that you have that big jug of water, because if that was me, I would not make it through the show. I also want to tell you, though, if you have questions for this coming week, first, don't tinker too much. But if you have questions, hit us up on Twitter at NFL Fantasy, or if you're watching the show on YouTube at youtube.com/NFL, did you know that Michael F. Florio is in that comment section answering seemingly every question that is coming through the pike? Now, unfortunately, he's not joining the show today because he's not wearing a floral shirt, so we're certainly going to miss him. But he is still going to be – no, he's joining us. Don't worry. But he is answering all those questions, and he's an awesome person. So I want you to show him some love, show him some respect, and he will get to your questions when available. One of the biggest questions, though, I would think this week is Tom Brady. Obviously struggled mightily against the New Orleans Saints a couple of nights ago. 2 fantasy points is all he scored, or in our league, he had negative points. I still beat Colleen Wolfe, who's our defending champion, so I'm not going to brag about – actually, I'm just going to brag about that right now. But how are we feeling about Tom Brady this week? Marcus, are you concerned at all?
I am. I said from the beginning of the season that Tom Brady was a matchup-based starter, and so far what we've seen from him this season has sort of borne that out. Now, obviously nobody thought he was going to put up a 2 spot against the Saints last week, but this is not a great matchup against that Carolina defense. Their pass defense has been good all season long, so I understand if you're starting Tom Brady. I know there are some quarterbacks that are on a bye that you might otherwise start, but I'm really just expecting maybe a 17, 18-point day, just kind of an average day from him.
I agree with you, Marcus. I went on NFL Fantasy Live this week, as well as our other show, Fantasy Bites, and I dragged Tom Brady. I was a little shady towards him, but then I have to remember that Tom Brady likes revenge. I feel like he is incredibly embarrassed about that performance that happened last week going up against the New Orleans Saints. Again, this is another divisional game. I think he's probably going to be right around where you have him at, 17, 18 fantasy points. So I do think some people will still start him with confidence. I won't be one of those people, but I think this is going to be a more exciting game for his receivers instead.
You know what, though? I think the last time we saw Tom Brady be embarrassed on a national broadcast, the Four Fingers game, looking for a 5th down, the following week, he crushed it with 166 passing yards. He did have a pair of touchdowns. The Buccaneers scored 38 points. So I think the Buccaneers will be motivated. But again, this could end up being a huge game for Leonard Fournette because the Panthers have allowed so much production on the ground this season. So it's tough. I've got him in the middle of the road. I still have him as a start. We'll see that in a couple of minutes here. But I do want to remind you that this is an unusual Sunday. There are 5 early games. Now, if you're on the East Coast, the 1 o'clock games on the West Coast for us, the 10 a.m. games, usually there's like 12, right? Like they overload the early games. But this week, there's only 5, obviously, because of the Masters. No spoilers, please. 7 late games, including Sunday night. So let's take a look at the notable actives and inactives for those early games, kind of help get you set up. Nick Chubb is active, and this is good. This is good for everybody. We're going to talk about this later on during the show, but this is good for Nick Chubb. This is actually really good for Kareem Hunt, too. So don't freak out if you have Kareem Hunt. Keep him in your lineup. I will tell you why in a little bit. Miles Sanders is active. This is great news. TJ Hawkinson, he popped up on the injury report on Friday. He's active, ready to go. He is probably my tight end 1 coming into this week, especially with Kenny Golladay, as you see, inactive. 2 big ones, David Johnson, inactive. Not only is David Johnson inactive, he's on the IR. So if your league allows you to have an IR spot, make sure that you do it. Go up, pick somebody up right now. Christian McCaffrey is also out. So, Kimmy, let me ask you, with those 2 players out, which one of their replacements do you trust the most this week?
All right, this means it's a toss-up between Duke Johnson and Mike Davis, but I'm going to take Mike Davis on this one. You have to look at how productive he is when Christian McCaffrey is not playing. He's had 70-plus total yards or a touchdown in 6 of the last 8 games. Plus, he's averaging almost 19 touches a game in those 6 games without Christian McCaffrey. I think Duke Johnson is a solid option as well, but I just have a little bit more confidence in Mike Davis.
I'm going to go the other way, and I think that's what your puppy is sort of urging me to do. I hear their dissent in the background. I'm going to go Duke Johnson on this one. He's a guy that I've always liked. I just feel like he ends up in sort of bad situations. I've said before, he's a good running back on teams with better running backs. He's a good receiver on teams with better receivers. But now he gets to sort of focus on one role with no David Johnson. He's got a pretty good matchup this week. I don't like Mike Davis going against the Buccaneers, especially when Curtis Samuel has become more involved. So, plus, look, the NFL football is called the Duke. So why wouldn't Duke Johnson go and ball out today?
I mean, that's just science right there. And Duke, I'm with you with Duke Johnson. I irrationally love him. He reminds me of like Ryan Reynolds when he was on Two Guys, a Girl, and a Pizza Place. And you thought like, well, this guy is going to be the guy to break out if he ever gets a chance. And then he's Deadpool. And he's amazing. He was a Green Lantern, and that was awful. But he was Deadpool, and he's been Van Wilder. Anyways, I like Duke Johnson as well this week. By the way, the inactive. So if you're wondering with all those late games, this is going to be an unusual situation. The inactives will be rolling out 2:30 p.m. Eastern time, 11:30 a.m. on the West Coast. Make sure you're following at NFL Fantasy. We'll give you the actives, inactives. Michael F. Florio will be very active on Twitter. I will be hiding because I don't want any Masters spoilers. I'm behind. I'm a lunatic. I like other sports. Forgive me. But let's take a look at some of the late game inactives and actives or guys who are going to be on the list who we're wondering about already. We already know that Chris Carson is out. That's good for DJ Dallas. Justin Jackson is not only inactive, he's on the IR. Again, you could probably release him or put him in a reserve spot. Joshua Kelly, Kalen Ballage, revenge game. Mark Ingram expected to play. Damian Harris is a game-time decision, but they're going up against the Ravens. That's a tough matchup. The Bengals RB1 is inactive, which means an opportunity for Giovanni Bernard going up against the Steelers. And as you see, Ben Roethlisberger is playing. And as James Coe noted last night on Twitter, the Steelers have the Ravens. Or excuse me, the Steelers have the Jags next week. So if you're going to need to stream a quarterback and don't want to use a waiver spot to stream a quarterback, you can pick up Ben Roethlisberger. Right now it's for free. Just keep him on your bench. But let's talk about Kenyon Drake, Marcus, because Ian Rappaport says that Kenyon Drake is expected to play. And if he's active for the Cardinals, is he active for you?
Not if I can help it. I understand that some rosters may not allow that sort of flexibility, so you probably are starting Kenyon Drake. But if I have other options there, I'm going with the other options. I mean, I think you're probably looking at maybe a 50-50 split in snaps between he and Chase Edmonds. That's sort of how the Cardinals have been rolling lately. But all year long, you can make a case that Drake has been outplayed by Edmonds. I expect that's going to continue again this week. I just don't see any reason to really force Drake into my lineup if I don't have to.
Well, what about Chase Edmonds? Do you still have confidence, Kimmy, going with him if Kenyon Drake is active?
Absolutely. You just heard what Marcus said. Chase Edmonds has been outperforming and outplaying Kenyon Drake all season long. I think even when Kenyon Drake is in the lineup, Chase Edmonds, he gets those carries. He's also involved way more in the passing game than Kenyon Drake ever has been. So yes, I have confidence starting and continuing to play Chase Edmonds week by week.
Yeah, I do believe this is a similar situation to what we have in Cleveland, where it might be beneficial for Chase Edmonds to have Kenyon Drake active. Last week, they gave him the ball 25 times. Wasn't as prolific, wasn't as good as he is normally when he's just coming in for spells, getting limited opportunities, kind of splitting the snaps. Although his last couple of weeks, he's been getting more snaps than Kenyon Drake. So I think that Chase Edmonds is absolutely a great start. I'm not even going to hesitate. Keep him in your lineup. Don't tinker with it right now. You're fine. You're ready to go. But guess what? Time now for 15 for 15 presented by Geico. Let's talk about some of our favorite starts at every position because it's Sunday FUNDAY! There it is. Let's start with a quarterback position and take a look at the stardom quarterbacks from my stardom and sit 'em column. Love Carson Wentz, even though the last time we saw him, he scored 8 points, but whatever. He'll be fine this week against the New York Giants. Drew Lock. Tua Tagovailoa, great start against the LA Chargers this week. Baker Mayfield, that was a fair weather one. We'll talk about the weather situation in Cleveland coming up. Tom Brady, I'm a middle of the road with Tom Brady, but let's talk about Jared Goff because Seahawks defense. Am I right, Marcus?
You are absolutely right. I probably should just end my analysis there, but I know that we have time to fill, so I'll talk a little bit more about the Seahawks defense and the fact that it is indeed bad. This year it has been awful. The secondary, which once was the strength of this team, I mean, the Legion of Boom is now the Legion of Whom. And as inconsistent as Jared Goff has been this year, I do think this is a situation where they're going to ask more of him because the Seahawks' run defense actually has not been bad. So I think it might be tougher for guys like Darrell Henderson, Malcolm Brown to sort of get going. And this is a week where I think we see a lot more action for Robert Woods, Cooper Kupp, maybe even the combination of Tyler Higbee and Gerald Everett. And Jared Goff is going to be the trigger man to kind of get all this stuff going.
All right, Jared Goff's going to be productive. You know who else is going to be productive? Carson Wentz. Guys, this is a matchup heaven for him going up against the New York Giants. When he went and played them back in week 7, he scored almost 28 fantasy points. I think he's going to be able to duplicate that yet again today. He's had 2+ passing touchdowns in 4 straight games. Plus, the Giants have allowed top 10 fantasy quarterbacks in 2 of the last 3 games. I know it's a dumpster fire of this division, but I have all the faith in Carson Wentz this Sunday.
You are telling no lies there about the division. Let's take a look at the running backs, though, because speaking of the NFC East, I've got Antonio Gibson as a start, Kareem Hunt as a start. I know a lot of people are concerned about the matchup for Josh Jacobs. I like him this week. The Denver Broncos have given up 14 receptions to running backs in the past 2 games, so hopefully they can throw him the ball out of the backfield. That would be nice. I got Darrell Henderson, Chase Edmonds, Leonard Fournette. But again, going back to Antonio Gibson, I love this matchup. But Kim, you also like another FTRB, right?
I think you could start every single Washington football running back this week because of that matchup against the Detroit Lions. They are allowing the most fantasy points to running backs this season. They're also allowing the 4th most receiving yards per game to running backs this season as well. J.D. McKissick, he's a guy who was available on a lot of waiver wires the last few weeks, but I went ahead and picked him up and plugged him into play this week because of this matchup. He's been a top 12 running back in 2 of his last 3 games. I think he's going to be able to duplicate that again today. Guy's a beast. Start him and Antonio Gibson without any doubt.
I do love the FTRBs this week against Detroit. I also love I also love the Cleveland RBs this week. I mean, the Browns have wanted to run the football a lot. Now they get Nick Chubb back this week, so he's a definite start against the Houston Texans, who have one of the worst run defenses in the National Football League. Throw in the fact that the weather could be very nasty there in Cleveland, which might make it hard to try and throw the ball, especially to throw it downfield. So I think whether it is Nick Chubb or Kareem Hunt, I think you're going to be solid at running back there for the Browns. So get one or both of those guys into your lineup if you can.
Kareem Hunt has actually averaged more fantasy points with Nick Chubb in the lineup, as hard as that might be to believe. Let's take a look at the wide receivers right here. Christian Kirk, Mike Williams. I know a lot of people, there hasn't been the consistency with Mike Williams as a lot of people would have loved to have seen, but I still feel confident in him today in what should be a high-scoring affair. Deontay Johnson is now getting in. The Bengals cornerback situation is so dire. They were trying to move John Ross, the cornerback. Of course, he got injured and is on the IR now or something like that. But that's how bad it is for the Bengals defensive secondary. So make sure you get Deontay Johnson in there. Allen Robinson is on the injury report too. That's a Monday night game, so we'll be monitoring that through the weekends. But the Cardinals have allowed the 2nd most fantasy points to wide receivers in the last month. So Marcus, how you feeling about Stephon Diggs?
Well, to quote Brad Pitt in Snatch, you like Diggs? I like Diggs. I think he's gonna have a big game this week. You mentioned the Cardinals really struggling against wide receivers over the last few weeks, and I have a feeling that this is going to be a game that comes down to Josh Allen versus Kyler Murray, which, by the way, I think could be a very entertaining showdown. Oh, yeah. This could be a very entertaining game this week. But I do think it's going to be a lot of the quarterbacks trying to make plays, and Stephon Diggs is still the primary option in that Buffalo passing game. So after a few sort of slow weeks for him, I think this is an opportunity for him to come back with a pretty big number.
A guy I also think is going to be able to come back, and he was someone who was injured, but now he is expected to play, It's a rookie, Jerry Jeudy, going up against the Las Vegas Raiders today. I love this guy, but I also like Drew Lock at quarterback. If there are any fans out there who play daily fantasy, I really like this stack this week. It's because Jerry Jeudy, since week 8, is averaging over 18 fantasy points per game. That's a really good number because he's had 10-plus targets in 2 straight games. The Raiders have allowed 3 top 10 fantasy wide receivers in the last 3 games combined. I think this is a huge breakout opportunity in game for Jerry Jeudy to be a beast in fantasy football this week.
Yeah, that Broncos offense is certainly coming alive. And let's take a look at the tight end board because, of course, Noah Fant will be on that board because he's got a good matchup against the Las Vegas Raiders. And, of course, TJ Hawkinson at the top there. Evan Ingram is now put together a nice little string of double-digit fantasy points in the last couple of weeks. He would have had a good game against the Philadelphia Eagles had he held on to that ball. Unfortunately, that didn't work out for him, but he's been playing very well as late, and he's also running in touchdowns, which is fun. Eric Ebron's a very interesting, he's a fantasy guy like us, so I always feel like compelled to put him on this list, but he's got a great matchup this week. Remember a couple of weeks ago when the Browns put some curtain jerker in, some dude you'd never heard of, Harrison Bryant. Am I getting that? I can't even remember the guy's name. But anyways, that's the tight ends. And that was 15 for 15. Presented by Geico. Up next, there are times when the sidekick actually surpasses the superhero they are supporting. Like Wally West, who not only grew up to be the Flash, some would say, like me, he was better than Barry Allen. So which fantasy sidekicks are ready to take the throne? We'll have that coming up. And there's Baker Mayfield. And we're trying to see what the weather's like there. It looks windy, although he's running, so maybe that's why. I don't know. The weather doesn't look too bad. It looks Cleveland-y. All right, you're watching NFL Fantasy Game Day presented by Geico. Here we are, the starting defenses for Week 10. The Eagles, they're going up against the New York Giants. That goes without saying. The Saints could have a little bit of a letdown after a huge win last week, but I still like them this week against the 49ers. The Packers against the Jags. Although Jair Alexander is inactive this week, I still like the Packers defense. And two of the top streaming options were Washington and Detroit. So if you didn't get one, just go to the other side of that game. Both quarterbacks can turn the ball over, so there you go. Welcome back to NFL Fantasy Game Day presented by Geico. I'm Rank. That's Kimmy. That's Marcus. Be sure to send us your questions at NFL Fantasy. You can also go to youtube.com/NFL And hit us up in the chat section. Our own Michael F. Florio is there answering all of your questions, getting you ready for week 10. But you know what? We can't let Florio have all the fun because I'm rude like that. So why don't we take some fan questions right now? And here's the first one. Jared Cook, Hunter Henry, or Rob Gronkowski. Marcus, which one of these tight ends would you want to start?
Ooh, I would probably lean toward maybe Jared Cook in this one, just because the Niners defense is so beat up. I expect the Saints are going to put up a number of points, so I would probably give Cook a slight edge.
All right, next question. Tua or Cam, Kimmy?
Ooh, I'm going to rock with Tua on this one. I think it's way better of a matchup going up against the Chargers this week. Cam, really tough one going up against the Ravens. So Tua.
Yeah, I love that call. All right. Non-PPR, Curtis Samuel or Tyler Boyd. I really do believe that Tyler Boyd has kind of stepped up to a level where you start him every week unless you're so loaded at wide receiver. Even with a tough matchup against the Steelers, I'm going to go with Tyler Boyd. All right, next question, please. Robinson or Chubb, Marcus?
This just feels like a humble brag here. I mean, I don't know how you can't put them both in your lineup, like who you have that keeps one of these guys out of your lineup. But I would probably lean with Nick. Yeah, I'm going to go James Robinson just because he's not going to split those opportunities. Chubb's going to have a good game. He's got to share with Kareem Hunt. James Robinson isn't sharing with anybody there.
I'm guessing they have Dalvin Cook or Alvin Kamara in that lineup. Will Fuller or Mike Evans, Kim?
Ooh, Will Fuller, Mike Evans. I think I'm going to rock with Will Fuller on this one. Speaking of splitting time, Mike Evans, there's a lot of weapons down there in Tampa Bay, so I think Will Fuller on this one.
All right. Well, thank you so much for sending in your questions. Keep them coming. Our Michael F. Florio, he's answering them diligently. And that's it. That's our question. That's the 5, right? Is it time? Oh, my gosh. It's time for Fantasy Heroes. I was just waiting for the animation. I don't know. I've got my monitor here. I'm looking. We're seeing. But anyways, we were talking about sidekicks before the break, or I was bragging about Wally West. Some of my favorite superheroes are the sidekicks. They're Wally West. They're Red Hood, who is obviously a former Robin. Nightwing, I guess they're all former Robin, or a bunch of them are whatever. Sidekicks, Christian Kirk this week. I will make an analogy here. Christian Kirk is like one of those sidekicks. He's like Tim Drake, who went back into time and became Batman. I love him this week for the Arizona Cardinals. He's really stepped up. As we've seen DeAndre Hopkins, his production's become kind of inconsistent over the last couple of weeks, but Christian Kirk has been dealing. He's had at least 20 fantasy points in 3 consecutive games, 5 touchdowns in the last 3 games combined. He's had 8 targets in the last 2 games. And the Bills, for as much as we love their defense, they allowed, I should say, the wide receiver 11 and wide receiver 21 in week 9. And I think we can see a very similar situation here. Kim, who do you like?
All right, I've been on the Rojo train this entire season, and I'm still on it, but I think Leonard Fournette may be the #1 running back this week for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers going up today against the Carolina Panthers that have allowed the 5th most fantasy points to running backs this season. Now, the reason I say that is because Leonard Fournette, he's had more snaps and touches than Rojo in 3 straight games. That's 17-plus touches in 2 of the last 3 games. I think he's going to be the #1 back this week. Don't quote me on it, but I got a feeling.
I'm quoting you.
I do think Fournette's going to get some quite a bit of opportunities. My sidekick is going to be T. Higgins, who really is sort of the Chewbacca to Tyler Boyd's Han Solo. Both these guys can really step up and perform well in a pinch when needed to. And Rank, you talked about the Bengals secondary being down so many players. That means the Steelers are probably going to throw the ball, get some points that way, which means the Bengals are going to have to throw the ball a lot in the second half. So I expect, even if you don't see a lot from T. Higgins in the first half of this game, I expect in the second half when the Bengals are in catch-up mode, he'll sort of fill in the gaps.
Yeah, I agree with you. I love both of those wide receivers. And before anybody flames me on Twitter, I know that Dick Grayson becomes Nightwing. I know that he becomes Batman when Batman is stuck back in. You don't have to tell me this. I know. So put away your phone and angrily tweet at me and anything like that. And that's where our fantasy superhero sidekicks for week 10. Now coming up, stop tinkering with your lineup, because coming up, we're going to go position by position to break down the ranks and give you our top starts. So you can blame us on Monday. You don't want to take that responsibility. You will be able to blame us. And you, of course, are watching NFL Fantasy Game Day presented by Geico. There he is, Deshaun Watson. You know, this is the guy I wanted the Bears to draft. I know everybody talks about Patrick Mahomes. I was in on Deshaun Watson, and I think he's been pretty good. And you know what? He's wearing short sleeves. Where is this weather in Cleveland I was promised? Because now I don't know what to do. I was worried about it. Were we overthinking it? I don't know. Welcome back to NFL Fantasy Game Day, presented by Geico. Adam Rank, Kim Chex, Marcus Grant, and we are going to start running through all the key positions and put some players up against each other, face-off style, determine who is the better start this week. There we go. Let's get rolling with the quarterback position. And Kimmy, why don't you lead us off? Carson Wentz or Jared Goff?
All right, both good matchups, but I'm rocking with Wentz on this one. Jared Goff had such a downer game a few weeks against the Dolphins that I'm rocking with Wentz.
All right, Drew Brees or Lamar Jackson for you, Marcus?
I'm going to go Drew Brees here. I mean, I know you've been preaching patience with Lamar Jackson. I get it. I just don't like the matchup, whereas, the 49er defense is not the same as what it was last year.
Wrong. We're going Lamar Jackson. I'm overruling you. Cam Newton versus the Ravens. Joey Burrow versus the Steelers. Kim, who you got?
I'm going with the old MVP Cam Newton on this one. He has had a touchdown at least in every single game this season. Both tough matchups, but I think that rushing and that red zone opportunity that Cam Newton presents is a little bit better than Joe Burrow.
Yeah, Joe Burrow's one struggling game came against the Ravens on the road. What about Tua Tagovailoa or Derek Carr this week, Marcus?
I love both these quarterbacks this week, but I'm going to go with Tua just because I think the rushing upside gives him a little bit of a safer floor. Plus, the Chargers secondary just has not been the same this year without Derwin James.
Yeah, I love the Tua breakout game as well. All right, let's move to the running back positions. Kim, who do you got between Jerick McKinnon or Ronnie James, Giovanni Bernard?
All right, I'm going to rock with Jerick McKinnon on this one. He's leading the San Francisco 49er backfield, and touches and total touchdowns this season. More consistency, more trust in them for me.
And by the way, that joke only works when I say Ronnie James Gio Bernard. Anyways, DeAndre Swift against the FT or Melvin Gordon against the Raiders, Marcus? No, hold on. DeAndre Swift or Zach Moss? I'm so sorry, Marcus.
I've gone back and forth on this one. I think I told our producer, Hyken Kalani, to start Zach Moss. But I'm going to say DeAndre Swift here. I just think now that he's getting the start, we know for sure. Maybe I feel better about him. He gets those goal line touches. This one really is a coin flip for me, though.
I'm with you. I think I'm with DeAndre Swift as well. All right, Darrell Henderson versus the Seahawks. Melvin Gordon versus the Raiders. Kimmy.
Darrell Henderson for sure. Melvin Gordon's not been good for me in fantasy football this season. Plus, Darrell Henderson is going up against the Seahawks. It's a way, way, way better matchup.
Yeah, it feels like a Phillip Lindsay game to me as well. What about J.D. McKissick or Wayne Gallman versus the Eagles? Marcus?
I know Wayne Gallman's become more of a thing lately, but I'm still going to go with J.D. McKissick just because the Lions have been so awful against running backs this year. So I think either one of those FT running backs, Gibson or McKissick, you can start this week.
All right, let's move on to the wide receiver position. Kimmy, let me ask you, Brandon Cooks versus the Browns or DJ Chark with no Jair Alexander at Green Bay?
DJ Chark, I know he had a good game with Jake Luton last week, but I'm rocking with Cooks on this one. DJ Chark has burned me way too much this season. I'm rocking with Cooks.
He has been battling inconsistency. Deontay Johnson versus the Bengals or Adam Thielen against the Bears? Marcus?
You talk about battling inconsistency. That's been Adam Thielen, so I'm staying away from him. I'm going Deontay Johnson against a team that doesn't have any cornerbacks. That just seems like science.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Devontae Parker versus the Chargers or Robbie Anderson versus the Bucs? Kimmy?
Devontae Parker on this one because we never know if it's going to be a DJ Moore or a Curtis Samuel or a Robbie Anderson type of game. I think this is going to be a shootout between Tua and Justin Herbert. Devontae Parker is going to get a ton of targets, so I'm rocking with him.
Brandon Ayuk or Jacoby Myers? Marcus?
I'm going Brandon Ayuk. I think the Niners will be playing from behind, having to throw the football. I just don't like Myers' matchup against the Ravens. I think he's got better long-term value, just staying away from him this week.
Let's move on to the tight end position. Dallas Goedert, who was not great in his return a couple of weeks ago, or Evan Ingram, who's been on a roll. Kimmy?
I know Evan Ingram's been on a roll, but I still kind of don't trust him. He's had good fantasy points the last few weeks, but I'm going to rock with Dallas Goedert on this one. I know it's risky, but YOLO.
No, I'm with you. I got him in my league of records. I'm taking notes, and I hope you're correct. Eric, I think you will be. Eric Ebron or Jared Cook, Marcus?
I'm going Eric Ebron. The Bengals have given up the second most fantasy points per game to the tight end position. Ben Roethlisberger's done a pretty good job spreading the ball around. And for tight ends, you just want touchdown upside, and that's kind of what Eric Ebron has.
Harrison Bryant had 9 touchdowns against the Bengals, or at least it just felt that way. Anyways, Mark Andrews with a tough matchup against the Patriots, or Gronk against the Panthers. Kim, which way are you leaning?
Mark Andrews all the way on this one. There are way too many mouths to feed down there in Tampa Bay. So Mark Andrews, he's still Lamar Jackson's favorite target. So rock with Mark Andrews. He's a good tight end.
I do want to point out Rob Gronkowski had touchdowns in 3 consecutive games, dropped what should have been his 4th, but he did drop it. So I'm just saying he was targeted in the end zone. Austin Hooper, listen, it's a toss-up. This is Austin Hooper versus the Texans, or Hunter Henry versus the Dolphins. Marcus.
Ooh, speaking of toss-ups, I'm going to lean toward Hunter Henry. Austin Hooper's been so inconsistently targeted when he's been on the field there. So I can't trust him. I'm going to give Henry the edge.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Every time I see him on the waiver wire, I'm like, do I want to do this? But I agree with you there on that one. But guess what? Time now for some fantasy insurance presented by Geico. And just a reminder, there are 4 teams on a bye this week: the Chiefs, the Falcons, the Cowboys, and Jets. So you know what that means. Make sure LaMichael Pirines not still in your lineup. Garrett Gilbert, get him out of there. How are you going to survive without Garrett Gilbert this week? So if you're missing Garrett Gilbert, because obviously he's the biggest name quarterback who is going to be on a bye this, okay, Joe Flacco. But Marcus, give us a quarterback you can stream this week.
I mentioned him a little earlier, Derek Carr. And I know I said I sort of like Tua over him, but that doesn't mean I don't like Derek Carr and I don't like his matchup. I mean, I think against the Broncos, he has a chance to go out and put up some good numbers. He's been playing pretty well this year, and maybe because he's not, immediately a top 10 fantasy quarterback, we don't think about him. But you see that there. The Broncos giving up a top 10 quarterback in 4 of the last 5. Derek Carr has found a connection with Nelson Aguilar downfield, so I do like him as a streamer this week.
All right, Adam Rank, I'm going to take a page out of your book. You're going to love this one because this guy's a Chicago Bear. It's a little bit of a deeper name, though. It's Darnell Mooney. Guys, he's averaging almost 14 fantasy points per game since week 8. He's leading the Bears with 11 targets last week versus the Titans in week 9. Now, the Vikings are allowing the 3rd most fantasy points to wide receivers this season. They've also allowed a top 10 wide receiver in 4 of the last 5 games. So Darnell Mooney, I know it's a little sneaky. He's still available in 97% of NFL.com leagues. So if you're feeling risky for the biscuit, go get Darnell Mooney into your lineup.
Love that pick, but I don't love being usurped. So I'm going to go with a guy who's even more obscure, and I'm going to say Jakeem Grant, who could end up having a bigger role for this Dolphins offense with Preston Wilson placed on IR with a foot injury. He ran 17 routes against the Cardinals in week 9. That was 2nd most amongst the Miami wide receivers. He's had at least 7 fantasy points in 3 consecutive games, but that was in a limited role. With him having the ability to step up this week, he's going up against the Chargers, who've allowed 2 receiving touchdowns in 3 consecutive games. If you have a wide receiver issue and you want to take a stab at somebody, want to get a little risky, as Kimmy was talking about, I think that Jakeem Grant could also be a great option. And that, my friends, was Fantasy Insurance presented by Geico. Now check this out. I've seen Pirates of the Caribbean 98 times. And if I know one thing about Buccaneers, is that they love gold, rum, and revenge. So up next, we're going to talk about which member of the Buccaneers can keep your team from falling deep into Davy Jones's locker. You're watching NFL Fantasy Game Day presented by Geico. And there he is, Curtis Samuel, dancing. Why is he happy? I wasted a 4th-round pick on DJ Moore. And you're sitting here being listen, this is a disappointing situation. I think this is something we're probably going to have to get into here in a little bit. There he is, carefree. Welcome back to NFL Fantasy Game Day, presented by Geico. As I'm expressing my frustration, we do have some burning questions for this week, so let's just jump right into it. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers, which wide receiver do you trust the most this week? Kim, why don't we start with you?
All right, I know this is crazy, but I said earlier in the last segment, I'm a risk it for the biscuit type of girl. I think that Antonio Brown is going to be the #1 wide receiver this week for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Rank on our show Fantasy Bites, you went and pointed out Tom Brady, per Next Gen Stats, he is throwing the ball way deeper on passes of more than 20 yards than he has in the last 5 seasons. He's going to continue to do that today against the Panthers, and he's going to be able to do that with Antonio Brown because of his elusiveness and his speed on the field, being able to separate from defenders. So I know it's crazy because Mike Evans and Chris Godwin are still there. There's a lot of mouths to feed, but Tom Brady is going to want to get the ball to his old friend Antonio Brown, and he's going to be numero uno.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. That's probably where I'd be looking because I think they are going to take some shots down the field. But Marcus, is there another receiver that you're looking at?
I'm going with Chris Godwin. I mean, he has been the #1 receiver on this team for the last year plus. I mean, it didn't really change a whole lot from Jameis Winston to Tom Brady. So I think now that he's back, he's healthy. Hopefully that finger has gotten a little bit better since he had surgery on it. I still think he's the guy that when they get in a pinch, that they're going to look for more often than not. So I'm going to give him the edge in this one.
All these options are risky, but I think listen, I'm willing to go with either one of those guys. And it seems like we think Mike Evans is the odd man out in that situation. Speaking of odd men out, let's move to the other side of the field in that game. The Panthers receivers have become extremely frustrating. Obviously, I was bemoaning the fact that I drafted DJ Moore this year. Hasn't quite worked out. Curtis Samuel has kind of emerged as the go-to guy. So, Marcus, how would you rank these Panthers wide receivers heading into Week 10?
So it might be recency bias, but I'm going to go with Curtis Samuel here. And basically what you saw at the top of this block rank was him dancing on your fantasy grade.
He was.
Because you drafted DJ Moore. But I'm going to go Curtis Samuel #1 because they have multiple ways of getting him the ball, both as a receiver and as a runner. Then I'll go DJ Moore second, and then Robbie Anderson as the third. Just because after that really hot start to the season, we haven't heard a ton from Robbie Anderson. And Carolina's starting to get these other guys a little bit more involved. So that's how I would go.
Kimmy,
Marcus,
are you in agreement?
I think you and I are twins because I completely agree. I agree in your order as well. I'm going to take Curtis Samuel #1, DJ Moore #2, and Robbie Anderson third. It's, in fantasy football, we're really used to crowded backfields and running backs confusing us. We never really have this situation with wide receivers, so it's a tough one. But I do think that Curtis Samuel is the #1 option this week. Robbie Anderson last, DJ Moore second.
You know what? I'm going to try to send a message, so I'm going to rank DJ Moore third, just to kind of put it out, because I want to light a fire. I'm like the Bruce Arians here. I want to light a fire by criticizing my good players, and that's just the way that I'm going to operate. So I feel like DJ Moore is probably on the field right now. He's got the all-new NFL Fantasy app. He's watching the show, having a good time. He's like, oh, rank seems delightful. He ranked me third. How dare he? And then he's going to go out and have a good game. I will point out, these teams played in Week 2. DJ Moore had his best game of the season, scored over 20 fantasy points. So there you go. So that's that. Those were the burning questions for Week 10. And coming up, we are going to be hitting the gas like Sean Boswell and turbocharging your lineups. Our starts and sits and more. And that's right. For the record, Tokyo Drift was extremely underrated. That was a good movie. Bow Wow was in it. How did you not like? Thank you. How did you not like Tokyo Drift? That was a quality film, of course, until The Rock saved it, like he saves everything. You're watching NFL Fantasy Game Day, presented by Geico. Time now for 15 minutes to kick off, presented by Geico. Here, Week 10's notable actives and inactives. Good news on the running back front. Nick Chubb, Miles Sanders are active today. Start both of them. You can still start Kareem Hunt. Don't worry about it. He's actually better when Nick Chubb is in the lineup. That's factual. But unfortunately, David Johnson is inactive and he's on the IR, so you can put him in an IR spot. And Christian McCaffrey also inactive this week. We just had him back for 1 week. But also, TJ Hawkinson active for the Lions. Kenny Golladay is out. That makes TJ Hawkinson my number one tight end this week. Ben Roethlisberger is going to be active. Kenyon Drake expected to play. Mark Ingram expected to play. Chris Carson inactive, so get DJ Dallas in your lineup, even though it's a tough matchup against the Rams. Justin Jackson, not only inactive, he's on IR. Kalen Ballage would be the replacement there. Giovanni Bernard is going to get the start for the Cincinnati Bengals. It's a tough one against the Pittsburgh Steelers, but he's got no competition for touches there in that backfield. And that was 15 minutes to kick off, presented by Geico. Welcome back to NFL Fantasy Game Day, of course, sponsored by Geico. I am Adam Rank. That's Kimmy Checks. That's Marcus Grant. And joining us, not in a floral shirt, is our own Michael F. Florio. And Michael, good to see you. You doing well?
I'm doing well. I'm excited to be on the show. I was a little nervous that Rank was not going to allow it to happen.
Well, against my, I did try to get you kicked off momentarily ago, but you've been sitting there doing such a great job answering the questions. Kimmy, Marcus, who do you think is the most asked about guy on this Sunday morning here in Week 10?
I want to go with DJ Chark. I know that's kind of a random one, but I think he performed so well with Jake Luton last week that a lot of people, because of injuries and buys with wide receivers, are wondering if they should start him again this week.
I'm going to go with the wide receiver, but I'm going to go Allen Robinson because he's still questionable and he plays Monday night. I think a lot of people are worried about him.
All right, who was it, Michael?
It was a wide receiver, but it wasn't either of those two. It was actually two teammates, and it's all weather-related today. The weather is the big topic. It was Will Fuller and Brandon Cooks. A lot of people wondering if they should pivot in different directions given that bad wind in Cleveland. And some players, I was excited for Fuller and Cooks, but I moved ahead of Fuller, Tyler Boyd, Allen Robinson, both Rams receivers. Travis Fulgham were some names I said to use over him. And then for Cooks, I lowered him a little bit too. Now I have, I was telling people to use Christian Kirk, T. Higgins, Devontae Parker, and Juju Smith-Schuster were some names that I got asked and I said to use over Brandon Cooks.
Out of those Texans receivers, it's Randall Cobb who has the fewest air yards per attempt at 7.7. So if you're looking for a receiver who plays closer to the line of scrimmage, that could also be an option for you. But let's answer some questions for the fans here. Can we roll those up? I think we got some fan questions. Thielen or Lockett both have tough matchups. Florio, which way would you go?
They both have tough matchups and both have been coming off of down games the last 2 weeks. But I'm going to go with Adam Thielen there just because I feel like his volume is a little bit safer. He's the top target there, and there's no Irv Smith this week. Whereas with Lockett, we know DK is going to take away a good amount of targets.
All right, next question. Thanks for reminding us about Irv Smith Jr. as well. But Lamar Jackson or Justin Herbert? Marcus, which way are you going?
I'm going Justin Herbert in this one. I mean, I know the Dolphins secondary has been tough this year, but I think he's been more consistent over the last month than Lamar Jackson is. That simple.
I'll allow it. Okay, next question. Now, I like Justin Herbert too. Sterling Shepard or Emmanuel Sanders in a PPR league? Kimmy.
Honestly, I'm going to rock with Emmanuel Sanders on this one. Drew Brees is spreading the ball around quite a lot. I know Michael Thomas is back in the lineup, but if you look at what they did against the Buccaneers, Emmanuel Sanders had such a good game. I think that's going to happen yet again. So Emmanuel Sanders.
I agree. I love that call. Next question, final question. Mike Williams or Brandon Ayuk for a flex standard scoring? Oh, my gosh. I think I'm going to go with Brandon Ayuk just because I think the volume of targets will be there for him. I like Mike Williams a lot this week, but he's more of a deep play threat. It's more volatile, and I think that Brandon Ayuk has an opportunity to be a little bit more consistent, even though that's a tougher matchup against the New Orleans Saints. And time now, though, for Sunday FUNDAY! All right, who are the players? Who are the players who are going to pop off this week? Marcus, why don't you get us started?
I'm going to go Devontae Adams. I mean, the guy has just been on fire all season long. In fact, my bold prediction earlier in the week on Fantasy Live is that he would go over 30 fantasy points for the fourth straight week. Now, I know the winds might be a little bit nasty today in Green Bay, so maybe that instead limits him to like 20 or 25 points instead. But the guy's been fantastic. He's pretty much the only guy they throw to against the Jaguars secondary that has been just sort of okay at best this year.
Marcus, I like that call. I'm going to go with his teammate, though, here, Aaron Jones. The Jaguars are a great matchup for running backs. They give up a lot of points. We know how good Jones is and how much work he sees each week already, but I think this is the perfect storm of just a fantasy blow-up game for Jones, as the Packers, due to the bad weather, could have to throw less, and that means more rushing attempts. And I think this is a game that the Packers will win pretty handily, so the second half could just be a lot of running the ball with Aaron Jones.
All right, Florio, you're going to love this pick because it's a Buffalo Bill. It's Josh Allen. He's not been a number one quarterback yet this season, even though he's made it into the top five different times. He's taking on Kyler Murray and the Arizona Cardinals, who are allowing the fourth most fantasy points to quarterbacks since Week 7. He just had a huge comeback game last week. Josh Allen, he is going to be the number one fantasy player this week. Quote me on it.
You know what? I love that game, Kimmy, so I'll go with the quarterback. I'm going to go with the quarterback on the other side, Kyler Murray. And you look at what he's been able to do. He's averaging close to 30 fantasy points per game this season. That's the most by a quarterback in NFL history. He's on the cusp of shattering that record, 37 fantasy points at least in back-to-back games, 21 fantasy points in every game this season. It's so funny that a lot of people are like, look, we think he's going to be this year's Lamar Jackson. We're like, don't put those kind of expectations on him. And then he's gone out there and he's exceeded him. So those are the players, though, who are going to go off. Who are some star players that we feel could be in a little bit of trouble this week? Florio, why don't you kick us off?
I'm worried about running back Josh Jacobs this week. When you drafted Josh Jacobs, the one concern you had was maybe no pass game usage, but you thought he'd get all the groundwork. The pass game usage hasn't come. He has one target in 2 straight games, but the running numbers haven't been there either. He has fewer than 80 rushing yards in 5 of his last 6 games, and if you're hoping he can make up for that with a touchdown, good luck, as the Broncos have only allowed 3 rushing touchdowns to running backs all season long. I think this could be a pretty low floor game for Josh Jacobs.
All right, Florio, I want to stick with the running back position and also stick with the Buffalo Bills since I talked about Josh Allen earlier. I'm really worried about Devin Singletary. He's had single-digit fantasy points in 4 of the last 5 games, and even though he's had 13 red zone carries, he's only had 1 rushing touchdown this season, whereas Zach Moss has had 3. The Cardinals, it's a really tough matchup against the run. They've only allowed 4 rushing touchdowns to running backs this season. That's tied for the 7th fewest in the NFL. So I think Zach Moss is starting to usurp Devin Singletary, so I'm really worried about his production from here on out.
I'm very concerned about Cam Newton this week, and he's put together a couple of decent games back-to-back, sort of rebounding from a bad stretch in the middle of the season, but they still really do have some questions at wide receiver, despite what we saw from Jacoby Myers last week. We're still waiting for the Patriots passing game to sort of get going. I just don't see that happening against the Ravens. And if they can keep him in the pocket because he hasn't been running nearly as much, I just think that floor gets a lot lower for Cam than we're used to seeing.
The player that I'm kind of worried about this week is Michael Thomas. And when the 49ers and Saints last met, Thomas tallied 11 catches for 134 yards and a score. And that was last year when the 49ers defense was good. But you know what? Here's the thing. Breeze has been spreading the ball around. The volume concerns me. This is a game that the Saints could get up big early and then kind of go away from the passing attack. Now, I want you to listen to me very carefully. You are starting Michael Thomas. I am not saying to bench him. So don't at me if he ends up having like 20 touches for 200 yards. I'm just saying I'm concerned about it. Is it bad? Like, I'm concerned. I'm sorry. I'm allowed to worry. Okay, I'm a parent. I can do that. Anyways, let's talk about some must-start running backs for Week 10. Kimmy, who do you got?
All right, earlier we were talking about this guy. I'm going to stick with him. It's Chase Edmonds. I don't care if Kenyon Drake is back into the lineup. You are starting Chase Edmonds this week. He's had 11-plus fantasy points in 4 of the last 5 games, 20-plus fantasy points in 2 of the last 4, plus Kenyon Drake, even though he's back in the lineup. I don't care. Chase Edmonds is the guy, must start running back this week with a favorable matchup against the Bills.
I know, Kimmy, you talked about Leonard Fournette earlier in the show, and I do think that Fournette's going to have a big opportunity. But I'm still going with Ronald Jones against the Carolina Panthers because the Panthers still have one of the worst run defenses in the National Football League. And look, if it stands to reason that I said that Tom Brady is just going to be meh today, then they've got to get some offense from somewhere, and I think it's going to be their running back. So maybe this is me just sort of continuing to pound away at this thing and believe in Rojo, but I'm staying with him this week.
I like that call, Marcus. I'm going to go with Antonio Gibson here, though. The Lions allow the most fantasy points to running backs. They give up a bunch of yards, both in the air and on the ground to the position. And this is a game that the Lions offense is banged up and they've been struggling. The Washington defense has been playing really, really strong, and they're now down to Alex Smith at the starting quarterback spot. I think they're going to look to run the ball a lot and rely on their defense to keep this a low-scoring, close game. And I actually think they could be playing with a lead in the second half. I think Gibson's upside is top 10, maybe even top 5 this week.
Love Gibson, love J.D. McKissick in that game as well. And another tag team that I like is Kareem Hunt. Now, obviously, Nick Chubb is back, and this is going to be better for Hunt moving forward. And I know exactly what I just said. Hunt had more touches in the 4 games without Nick, which makes sense. But Hunt has scored more points per game with Chubb in the lineup, 17.43 to 13.63. So this is actually better for him. So I love Kareem Hunt this week. What about wide receivers? Marcus, who's a wide receiver that you like this week?
It might sound weird, but I'm going to go Jarvis Landry this week. Yeah, part of it is the matchup because the Texans secondary has been pretty vulnerable all season long, and some of it actually has to do with the weather. We know that Cleveland's going to run the football. That goes without saying, but they will have to throw it every once in a while, and because the weather can be bad, because it might be really windy, you want a guy who does play a little bit closer to the line of scrimmage. That favors a guy like Jarvis Landry over somebody like, say Rashard Higgins, who's more their downfield threat. So especially in PPR leagues, because that is where Landry excels, he could be a really nice opportunity here.
I'm going to roll with Christian Kirk against my Buffalo Bills. Kirk has been playing well, scoring over 20 fantasy points in 3 straight. And in that span, he has more yards, touchdowns, red zone targets at 20-plus air yards, and most importantly, more fantasy points than D-Hop. And with D-Hop going to see a lot of Trey White this week, I think that opens up things for Christian Kirk on the other side.
All right, Christian Kirk, love that. I also love Juju. So does my dog, if you couldn't hear him barking in the background. Homie cannot chill out. But let's talk about Juju. He's had almost 10 targets a game since week 7. It's been a huge kind of second half bounce back for him. He's also had 13-plus fantasy points and 3 straight games. I think it's a good matchup going against the Bengals today, so get him in your lineup.
I think the dog was just, saying how much he or she liked Christian Kirk. And I hope that the dogs will start barking for Terry McLaurin because I love this start as well. We're talking about the FT backfield. See, look at the dog. Yep. See, everybody knows. Start Scary Terry. 8 targets, 7 receptions, 115 and a touchdown in his last game. He's had at least 7 receptions in 3 consecutive contests. He had 24.5 fantasy points, the second most by a wide receiver versus the Giants earlier this year. But they're going up against the Lions. That's a little bit of a different. But listen, whatever. It's a good matchup for him. Love Terry McLaurin. I traded DeAndre Hopkins. Anyway, nobody cares about my team. Anyways, let's go to the boomer bust players for week. I was going to go into a story. We don't need to hear this story. What about a boomer bust player for this week? Florio, who do you think could be just somebody who's exceptional, or it could be just like, why did I start him and I got 0 points?
I think Jalen Reagor fits that bill pretty well. Before their bye week, he had 6 targets, 2 of which were for 20 or more air yards. They did not connect. That's the issue with those long targets. They're harder to connect than the shorter ones. But if they're using him in that role this week against the Giants team, I like their chances of connecting on those this week, as the Giants have allowed the 7th most completions of 20-plus air yards this year. And I keep saying it, but I think he is going to remind a lot of Giants fans this week of what Deshaun Jackson did for them for so many years.
Jalen Reagor's a good one, and so is Mike Williams. Rank, I know you'll agree with me on this one. It's such a boom or a bust guy. He's had 21-plus fantasy points in 2 of the last 4 games. Yes, he can be really good and productive, but he can also not get targeted and get the ball. I think this could be a really fun game with Justin Herbert and Tua. I hope Mike Williams is involved, but temper expectations because he could blow up or he could not be so hot.
Well, when I say this, the sound you hear will be the eyes of a million fantasy managers rolling. But Jordan Reed, we saw him earlier in the year when he was healthy and really had a very good game before he got hurt. Now, last week he came back, was in a limited opportunity, but this is a chance for him to sort of get more snaps, get more targets, and in a 49er offense that needs playmakers. So it could go really well for him, or he could get you like one catch for 3 yards. It's pretty much no in between.
I think that Kimmy's dogs are now saying, don't do that. I am so like Jordan Reed every time, and I always get drawn in. But Miles Sanders, though, I want to take a moment here because Miles Sanders is returning, which is great. And anytime this happens, like it seems so automatic. We're so excited about Miles Sanders. You're obviously going to start him. But it is one of those situations where I have like unreasonable expectations for Miles Sanders, where if he scores anything less than 30 points, I'm going to be extrememely disappointed. But he's coming back from an injury. Like we've seen this happen plenty of times. So I don't know. I'm starting him. I know again, that's one of those things that you are looking at and you just see him. You drafted him in the first or second round, but hopefully he can come through. But I do want to thank everybody for joining us here today. Thank you for watching NFL Fantasy Game Day presented by Geico. There's Alex Smith getting ready to start the first time in 700 days. Thank you.